As you've heard, today is the first Sunday of Lent. You may have noticed the robes. We also, choir and ministers, robe to be a reminder of the season that we are in as we are making our way towards Easter, but don't want to take it for granted and want to be sure that we've paid attention to the path that takes us there. And we had a beautiful Ash Wednesday service last week with our neighborhood churches to begin the season, and grateful for our choir members who came to be a part of that. One of the early historic purposes of this season of Lent was to prepare candidates for baptism. It wasn't something that happened year-round, but they waited and prepared for that time. It was a reminder that they need to be prepared for the difficulties of a life that's committed to following Jesus. And so as we begin this season, we pick up our story of that path that Jesus followed in Scripture. So after Jesus had come up from the waters of baptism and he heard those words of affirmation and identity, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And he heads out on a retreat of sorts in the wilderness, where he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. I think I've mentioned I don't recommend doing that, but that's a long time. I've just been trying to do that intermittent fasting thing where you go 12 to 16 hours without eating and then eat within a short period of time. That's easier said than done. And less than 24 hours and I'm ready to bite somebody's head off. It's like, get me some food or get out of my way. So I can't imagine 40 days. He wasn't just skipping a few meals. For this retreat, he goes into the wilderness. And the wilderness was a meaningful place, a place of waiting, a place of preparation. It's a place to grapple with God, a place to learn dependence on God and nature. It's a place of extremes, of wild animals and harsh winds and hot sun and cold nights, a place of heart-stopping beauty and desperate loneliness. And he wasn't going there to stay, but he was going there to get away from the noisy barrage of people's opinions and suggestions. He was stepping away from the busyness and the comfort of his daily routine for a time to make himself vulnerable enough to know what he would need to let go of, to be sure he knew what his purpose was and he was going to be ready to see it through. I have to admit that I haven't really ever spent any legitimate time in wilderness. I don't know if any of you have. I'm pretty sure camping on the beach doesn't really count. I was never too far from an actual restaurant, and or you could walk to where there were street lights, really. So I can't say from my own experience I know what being deeply into a place of physical wilderness would feel like. But I know that it has meaning. It is a metaphor. The desert represents a place to go to shed the distractions of everyday life. It's a place to throw off anything that protects us from feeling what is really going on inside. We are told then that he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. That one always gets me. I have to think about that. He was led by the Spirit into temptation. And we pray every week, lead me not into temptation. I don't want to go there. Send me somewhere safe, please. But it is important to note that Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. Again, it makes us think that maybe our lives are not as disconnected as we think. Maybe all aspects of our lives are intertwined, and the Spirit and the devil here symbolize and represent that process of spiritual growth that is happening throughout our lives, whether we like it or not, when we are led into places that are uncomfortable and we have to trust in God. So it's in the wilderness that we face the silence that allows us to hear and experience whatever fears and desires are within, and letting that bubble up and be acknowledged. And that's frightening. Please, someone turn on the TV. How many people have the TV running in the background when you're in your house? Turn on the radio. Where is my playlist, my podcast? Someone please distract me. I don't want to hear the silence. But this is the place where Jesus goes into the silence, and he didn't bring his lunchbox. He was more than hungry. He ate nothing all those days. He was famished. And then the tempter says to him, if you are really God's beloved son, command the stone to become a loaf of bread. You don't have to feel this pain. You can do something to stop it. And Jesus answers with the words of those who had gone down this path before him. It is written, one does not live by bread alone. There is something more important than securing my comfort. It's living in relationship, in tune with the will and the way of God. I think the next temptation that he receives relates to our desire to use the power of lies and misinformation and domination to get the attention and the recognition that we feel that we need. For the devil led him to a high enough place to see all the kingdoms of the world, and then said, to you I will give their glory and all of this authority, for it's been given over to me, and I will give it to anyone I please. If you will worship me, it will be yours. If you will worship me. Another place where we may want to let go of our literalism and allow this scripture to speak to us. For to worship evil does not mean standing in front of a picture of a horned figure with a tail and a pitchfork and saying, I'm with you. It's not performing some strange ritual that you probably saw in some horror movie sometime. To worship evil is to choose to use lies and coercion rather than truth and honesty. It is to trust violence over compassion. Because the truth in our lives is that we worship the power that we believe controls the world. And domination seems to work so well and so fast. It seems to work. But if we believe in the God of love and the power of love, then we know that this offer is based on a lie. For all the power and the prestige and the privilege of this world is fleeting, and its fame is fickle. But telling people what they want to hear seems to get results, and we are tempted because it seems to work. Now, for that last temptation, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you. This temptation suggests the desire to gain control over our lives by manipulating God, by twisting Scripture, by testing God, rather than trusting God's love in the midst of life's difficulties. We want out rather than through. Debbie Thomas points out that this third temptation targets Jesus' vulnerability, and it reminds us of our own. God will command the angels to protect you. On their hands they will bear you up so you won't even dash your foot against a stone. The suggestion is that if we are God's beloved, then God will keep us safe from physical and emotional harm, safe from our frailty and disease, safe from accidents, safe from death. And there are churches that teach that as if it were the truth. It's such an enticing lie. It targets our deepest fears about what it means to be human and broken in a dangerous world. We want to believe that we can leverage our belovedness into a shield of protection, that we can get God to guarantee swift rescues if we just believe hard enough. But no, If the cross of Christ teaches us anything, it teaches us that God's precious children still bleed and still ache and will still die, and we are loved in our vulnerability, not out of it. The Reverend Guy Sales shares his wilderness experience that took and is taking more than 40 days. He writes to his friends, 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and these 3 years have been like a sojourn in the wilderness. For I have been facing off with fears and limits, recognizing that some of the diminishments I have sustained are permanent, accepting that from now on I will live and eventually die with this illness. So the wilderness is a crucible of identity. What does it mean for me, for how I see myself, for how others see me, that I am chronically sick with a presently incurable disease? Who am I now that I no longer have the physical or psychic energy to live out my life the way I once did? He writes, one of my wilderness tasks is to be less concerned about role and more concerned about soul, to be less attentive to position and more attentive to personhood and simply offering of my gifts. I get to learn that it is enough and more than enough to be a child of God whom God takes great delight. To be a child of God is still to be vulnerable and beloved at the same time. So in his wilderness experience, Jesus acknowledged the temptations that would likely be in front of him on the road of life. What pain was going to make him want to quit? What frustrations would cause him to want to take a shortcut to get to his goal? What needs within himself would he have to resolve in order to be able to choose freely God's way of sacrificial love? That was his wilderness experience. And the season of Lent invites us to take that trip into the wilderness of our own hearts and ask the questions, what pain, what fears will make us want to quit? It's different for different people and at different times in our lives. We know that for people who were deprived of food during childhood, never knowing if there was going to be enough to keep that pain of hunger at bay, often have a hard time as adults feeling ever satisfied or full. Our brains are wired to keep eating, to keep seeking. There's an ongoing fear of never having enough. What pains from our past need to be acknowledged in order to be overcome, that we might live the life we are called to live. What desire for recognition, acclamation lives deep within us? What desire for control do we need because maybe we felt out of control in our life? So for the next few weeks, you are invited to take on a willingness to see what is there without interpreting ahead of time what you think in the same old ways. You're challenged in some way, maybe not going out to the desert, but in some ways to remove the distractions that protect you from experiencing what's inside. To see yourself and the world as it really is, to allow yourself to experience the paradoxical nature of the life that we live, the good and the evil, the pain and the joy. And although you may spend some time alone in this process, you are not going it alone. There are angels along the way guarding your heart. There are friends along the path walking with you. For that is who we are. The church is where we support one another, both in exploring those painful depths of ourselves and in celebrating the beauty of our lives. But when we allow ourselves to experience the pain of maybe what we've been repressing, the fear of loss we've been denying, the potential for evil that lies underneath the surface of each of us, then we are truly able to forgive, to experience God's forgiveness, to have that deeper connection with God and with others who we begin to realize are just like us. It's also interesting to notice that right after the story of the temptation, we get Jesus sharing the Beatitudes, where he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, and blessed are those who can weep and grieve and take that process that leads back to love and joy." The season of Lent is a part of the path of mature and thoughtful spirituality. The purpose is not just to give up something that's fun so that we can feel bad, or to test our ability to be obedient. The intent is to choose to let go of something that we know is keeping us from experiencing life as God has given it. Anything that might satiate that anxiety of life that creeps up, maybe the habits that we hide behind when we're afraid to step out and move forward in life. So the purpose of Lent is not so much to give something up or to choose something to put away, but to become more attentive, to become more conscious, to become more open to where the Spirit might be leading, even if it is out of our comfort zone. By looking within at ourselves and really looking at the world around us together for these 40 days, we are preparing ourselves to participate in the purpose and the passion, the surrendering of self that Jesus took on to take us to the resurrection, that place that gives us a new and deeper sense of hope and joy. So together we join this season of contemplation and examination.